Hello, may we start our webinar? So, Mrs. President of Ifrane Forum, distinguished speakers, welcome to our participants to this webinar under the theme African Continental Free Trade Area, Changing the Paradigms for a Successful Integration. First of all, I would like to thank Ifrane Forum for this initiative. The theme is very important and crucial to the development of our continent. And also, we would like to thank our prominent speakers. They offered generously their time so as to share their thoughts and opinions. So our theme, changing paradigms for successful integration with the African Continental Free Trade Area. It's a long process, as you know, starting since 1964. If we come to January 2022, we are at the 8th Ministerial Council meeting. We have several tools and announcements that they are very encouraging. They are talking about encouraging R&D, about $1 billion at the Afrexim Bank at the service of the integration of the value chain integration in Africa, about cumulative origin rules for strategic sectors such as automotive industry, and also about inviting all the economic politics in several countries to really converge for the integration of Africa. They give also orientation for the textile, because nothing happens today, but they invite to have a new approach that we make of this sector a strategic sector in Africa. Also, they developed a Pan-African system for payments and settlement system. That is very great news. It was the 13th of February this year. Also, they established funds to develop the automotive industry in Africa, and also funds to help small economies to integrate the African Continental Free Trade Area. All these tools are very encouraging, and they're talking about how to go further to make it successful. Why? Because this free trade area agreements, it's about Africa, about 1.2 billion of people, 2.5 trillion as cumulative GDP for this continent. And World Bank told us that the intra-exports will grow by 81%, thanks to this free trade area if it's fully established. The industry will be booming, and services also. So to run our webinar, we have 4 questions that with our prominent speakers we should respond to. So first question, how can we identify the obstacles that obstruct the achievement of a free trade area between African countries? We have second question, what are the means to progressively remove customs barriers and dematerialize procedures? Third question is how to better identify the challenges of the FTA and help different parts of the chain to fully benefit from its benefits. And for the fourth question, what are the new stakes of regional integration in the COVID-19 period? So for these 4 questions, we have 3 prominent speakers. May I introduce them? We have Mr. Amin Idris Adoum, Director of Program Delivery and Coordination at AUDA, NEPAD. He's graduated from London Business School. Welcome to Amin. And he worked in several organizations at African Union. And he is now in charge of accelerating quality and implementing delivery of programs in infrastructure, energy, environment, trade and industry, education, human capital development, innovation, and technology. The second speaker, we have Mr. Zayan Adoui. Welcome to Zayan, Managing Director for Centurion Law Group's AFCFTA desk. He's oil and gas specialist, large coverage of more than 25 projects and in 12 sub-Saharan countries. Last but not the least, Mrs. Marie Providence Mukangu. She is Master of Law and a Bachelor also of Law. And now she is an international trade law at UNCTAD, provides support to eliminate non-tariff barriers, increase regulatory transparency, and promote industrial diversification. Dear participants, we have 60 minutes to go all over these 4 questions with our speakers. We may give 12 minutes for each question, and we will leave 12 minutes to debate and to give the floor to our participants to enrich this exchange. So, dear speakers, may we start with the first question? As you know, how can we identify the obstacles that obstruct the achievement of a free trade area between African countries? Mr. Amin, how can you help us to give some highlights for this question?
All right, thank you very much. Thank you, Zara, and good afternoon to the other speakers. Good afternoon as well to all the participants. In fact, when we talk about barriers for a free trade area, usually people look always to regulatory barriers, for instance. Those are very well known, so I'm not going really to go into that one. I would rather actually talk about some other barriers if you want really to take full profit of the continental free trade area. Those barriers are mostly actually linked to the way our companies, our businesses are organized. So number one, you have the issues of funding. So most of our businesses in Africa are micro, small, and medium enterprises. There are about 100 million micro, small, and medium enterprises across the continent, and only 8% of them are functioning as formal business. Functioning as formal business means they have an accounting, they have financial management system, well-thought organizational structure, and more important, they are fully registered. So that's actually one of the main, I would say, barrier that refrain them from accessing even to financing. So we need actually to address this. The other issue, of course, businesses all across the continent, they are scattered, so they network hardly, they hardly network. A business in Morocco, for instance, would hardly actually connect with a business, I would say, in Kenya, extremely difficult because of lack of infrastructure, telecommunication infrastructure, transport infrastructure, and also the difficulty actually for people to move from one place to another. This is extremely important. Another barrier is our businesses in Africa really don't have proper access to advice. So advisory management is not something which is well developed and well used in the continent. And if there is, and it's of good quality, it is very expensive. Another barrier is, I would say, fragmented and inefficient government processes in all our countries. And this is actually a huge barrier because you see that in all our countries, government processes are quite complex, difficult, and they are fragmented. And so if government process in country A is difficult, in country B it's the same. And the bad thing and the worst actually here is that there is no really standard. Let's take the example. You want to move good from, let's say, Niger, which is neighbor to Chad, two different regional economic regions, communities, number one, two different customs systems, and even if you bring technology, it's going to be very difficult for them actually to move from one place to another. So I will stop here Those are the main barrier out of the regulatory and legal and all those governance barriers that we have. Thank you.
Thank you, Amin. I may agree with you that funding, the networking, the lack of infrastructure, the advisory management, it's really true obstacle, and the fragmented processing between the governments do not help a lot the integration between business communities in our continent. Mr. Zayan, how can you also consolidate these four obstacles on the others that they are under your specialties as gas and oil specialist, and you are governing more than 25 projects through 12 countries, sub-Saharan countries. So you may see and notice this kind of obstacles. Thank you.
Thank you very much. I do agree that, funding is a problem for trade, and that's not just in respect of Africa alone. But one thing I've seen in my experience is that projects are not optimized. They're duplicated because of the go it alone, strategy many African countries have. So that's why a more integrated Africa will result in having projects where the costs are reduced because facilities can be centralized. And when facilities are centralized, several countries or a number of regions, can take an advantage of those facilities to reduce project costs. Now, the issue of funding is also, it's a double-edged sword. Bankable projects will always be financed. So why funding will be difficult is because you have projects that are not, bankable, or the costs are too high, or when you consider the net back economics, you arrive at something that's not, what financing. And so when we talk about reducing tariffs, I think that should be able to assist in reducing that problem. We all know that transporting goods, and moving services across Africa has historically been quite difficult because of a lack of infrastructure. Sometimes it's easier to move things out of the continent. Movement of people, of something we in Africa try to shy away from, is also very important. You cannot underestimate the ability of an African entrepreneur or a young person to prospect on a continental scale. So for as long as we continue to shy away from that, we might not be able to have that comparative, advantage, or be able to compete with the rest of the world significantly. The concept of shared prosperity, I think, is something Africans need to lock onto. Understand that Africa is a block. The amalgamations and segregations that were handed to us and we've, handled religiously have never, been beneficial to us as a continent. We need to see that there are synergies between South Africa and Mozambique, Nigeria, Ghana, what have you, which, as a block, thinking about the resources and having a way to have a regional plan to develop these resources and to trade reasonable, with fair rules and also lower costs. These are things that could really engender a prosperous Africa. We must bear in mind that trade is not the end, it's a means to an end. The end is Africa to become, competitive, for Africa to improve its wealth and the conditions of living across the continent.
Thank you, Zayan. Yes, you are talking about the lack of centralization and also duplicating projects, problem of funding, transportation, infrastructure. For you, it's easier to move goods out of continent rather than to exchange African countries. Also, problems of movement of people, and you may recommend regional plans for development. of industry or sectoral any sectoral development. Thank you for your thoughts, and perhaps we can ask Marie if you have any suggestions also in enrichment to these questions.
Thank you, Zara, for allowing me to contribute as well to this very important question. To add to what the previous speakers have said, well, it has been observed that most SMEs in Africa are concentrated in low productivity and small. I mean, they operate at the small scale level and in low productivity sectors. So in order for them to take advantage of opportunities offered by the AFCFTA, they have to shift to high productivity sectors, to labor intensive and skills intensive activities. And that would require actually that they diversify or add value to the kind of products and services that they trade in order to remain competitive on the continental market. There's also the issue of access to information, not only in addition to the networking component of it, in the sense that businesses across the continent do not communicate with each other, but there's also a problem of lack of information, lack of access to trade relevant information with regards, for instance, to customs procedures or to any kind of requirements that may be attached to the goods and services traded. That makes it more difficult for traders to move goods from one country to another, because there are some regulations that simply cannot be done away with and that need to be complied with before a product can get into another African country's territory. So it's also very important to make sure that the information is easily available, that it's easily understandable, and that there's a lot of transparency when it comes to to compliance-related issues. I would say that those are some of the critical, points or the critical things that need to be addressed. And of course, that there's something that is very important, which is really in the area of engagement. Very important that the private sector actually engage in the policy space with the policy makers, with regulators, to make sure that their concerns or their constraints are known and are actually addressed by the policy makers. So very important that they actually do engage at that level.
Thank you, Marie. So for you, it's that we have high concentration of SMEs on low productivity sectors, and you may recommend that they have to diversify their products and services and to go more and more to high productivity activities. And you highlight that the access to information is very important, is very relevant for these SMEs, and also they have to make their voice to the policymakers, so their concerns will be taken into account for any political sectors policy. So I think we finish with this question. We have this 12 minutes. We can move to the second questions. And I stay with you, Marie, because I know that you are specialist in how to remove customs barriers. And I give you the floor because you tell me that you have a presentation. And we will share your slides on the screen, that our participants can enjoy the information and also your explanation. Thank you.
Thank you. So today I'm going to be presenting on a very important tool that was launched to support the implementation of the African Continental Free Trade Area, and that is the non-tariff barriers reporting, monitoring, and eliminating mechanism. Next slide, please. So the mechanism was actually launched at the launch of the operational phase of the AFCFTA in Niamey. In July 2019. The other operational tools, of course, were launched. You mentioned earlier the Pan-African Payment and Settlement System that was officially launched earlier this month by the AFCFTA Secretariat and Afrexim Bank. You also have the rules of origin, the online tariff negotiation portal, and of course the African Trade Observatory. But the focus, of course, of this discussion today will be on the AFCFTA and tariff barriers online mechanism. The NTB tool has been designed, of course, to support the implementation of the AFCFTA. And I'd like to highlight that the tool is operational now and can be used. It's free and accessible to all. In terms of just giving you a status of the AFCFTA agreement ratification and negotiation process, as of February 2022, the AFCFTA agreement has been ratified by 42 African countries. I understand that DRC has just deposited its instrument of ratification yesterday. Of course, the Cabo Verde was the 41st state party to have ratified, and now we have DRC. In terms of trading goods, then the rules of origin have been negotiated at 87.7%. When it comes to trading services, the 46 schedules of specific commitments have been received, and when it comes to phase 2 issues, which relates to investment, intellectual property rights, and competition policy, the negotiations are ongoing. Next slide, please. So as I explained before, the NTB mechanism, of course, relates to non-tariff barriers. So I think it's important to understand what non-tariff barriers are. So they actually refer to a wide range of restrictive regulations and procedures that are imposed by government authorities that make the importation and exportation of goods difficult and or costly. Some examples of it could be discriminatory or arbitrary application of sanitary and phytosanitary measures, restrictive customs procedures, or unjustified application of those custom procedures. But it's important also to note that not all regulations or procedures that are costly are non-tariff barriers. Some of these regulations are actually put in place for legitimate reasons, such as the protection of human life, plant life, or animal life, for environmental reasons, or again for to achieve important public policy objectives. So key really is to make sure that such measures are not unnecessarily restrictive or discriminatory in their application. Well, of course, studies have also shown that the impact of non-tariff barriers was much more significant than that of, tariff barriers, and that the removal of non-tariff barriers would actually have African countries benefit 4 times more than they would benefit by just removing tariffs, or by just liberalizing tariffs. In terms of just understanding the structure of the agreement, you have the AFCFTA, the framework agreement, and which also contains a number of protocols that regulate specific issues. So you have a protocol on trading goods, a protocol on trading services, a protocol on the rules and procedures on the settlement of disputes, protocols that will regulate phase 2 issues, meaning a protocol on investment, on intellectual property rights, and on competition policy. There's also a protocol on e-commerce that will be negotiated soon. And just recently, heads of states and governments of the African heads of state and government have also included women and youth within the ambit of the AFCFTA, within the scope of the AFCFTA. But now what is related to the NTB mechanism, if you can go back to the next slide, please, is actually the protocol on trading goods, which contains a number of annexes, and of course appendices. Next one. The annex that is really relevant to us in this instance is the Annex 5 on non-tariff barriers. Next, please. Next. So what does the Annex 5 on non-tariff barriers provide for? It provides for an institutional structure for the elimination of non-tariff barriers. It provides for a general categorization of non-tariff barriers in the AFCFTA. It provides for the reporting and monitoring tool, and it provides also for procedure that will facilitate the resolutions of NTBs that have been reported. Next. In terms of institutional structure, in terms of just the legal background or the legal basis of, the identification of non-tariff barriers, you have Article 12 that provides for the identifying, reporting, resolving, monitoring, and elimination of non-tariff barriers. And that has to be done in accordance with Annex 5. And of course, Annex 5 provides for that mechanism. And you have a provision that specifically states that any state party or economic operator may register a complaint or a trade concern through the mechanism that is provided under Annex 5. So as I said, again, I reiterate that the mechanism is open to all and it's free and it's actually operational. So in terms of institutional structure, 3 institutional structures have been put in place. You have 1 at the continental level and 2 at the national level. At the continental level, you have the NTB coordination unit. At the national level, you have the national monitoring committees, and you also have the national focal point. So the NTB coordination unit sits within the AFCFTA Secretariat, and its main mandate is really to coordinate the elimination of non-tariff barriers that have been reported on the mechanism, and therefore has to collaborate with the different institutional structures that have been established under the annex for that purpose. The National Monitoring Committee is actually a very interesting structure because it comprises both members, a number of stakeholders, including representative of the private sector and representatives of the government. And the role of the National Monitoring Committee is to work with the national focal point in the monitoring and resolution of non-tariff barriers that have been reported. And of course, you have now the national focal point who has a number of functions, namely to coordinate the implementation of the NTB mechanism. He also provides secretarial services to the National Monitoring Committee. He or she facilitates the removal of non-tariff barriers. They basically does the follow-up to make sure that the non-tariff barrier that is being reported has been resolved. And he or she is also responsible for tracking or monitoring NTBs through the utilization of reporting tools. Next, so in terms of the appendices, the Annex 5 has 2 appendices. You have the first appendix that provides the general categorization of non-tariff barriers. So it provides for 7 categories with subcategories. I will not go into that because of time constraints. And now you have the second appendix that actually provides the procedural process for the resolution of the NTBs that have been reported. So you have 3 phases to the resolution. The first phase is actually the request and response on a specific NTB that requires some kind of interaction between the focal points of the countries that are involved by the NTB or that are concerned by the non-tariff barrier that has been reported. So it's basically a consultation process where the 2 parties try to find a solution. But if they fail to find a solution at that on the first phase, they have to resort to the second phase of the resolution, which is to use a facilitator to resolve the complaint. And if that process also fails, then they have to resort to the dispute settlement under the terms of the Protocol on Dispute Resolution or Dispute Settlement within the framework of the AFCFTA agreement. In terms of the implementation timelines, the tool has been developed. Of course, the AFCFTA agreement had entered into force, which means that also the operational, the tool has become operational. All the national focal points have been identified and trained. And as of 1st of January 2021, which marks the start of trading under the AFCFTA, the mechanism became compulsory. This slide just provides the different links to the mechanism. So I actually invite you in your free time to go and actually explore the mechanism and look at the different options that are contained therein. I would like to think that it's a fairly easy tool to use, and the only requirement really is just to create an account within the system. Then it becomes easy for the users to report the NTBs they face when trading. Next, please. So the next 3 slides actually gives you an idea of how the mechanism looks. Now, the slides are in French, but that doesn't mean that you cannot change the language. You actually have an icon to your far right, the option of language, and then you can change it either in English, in Arabic, basically in the AU languages. And then you have different options, of course, different options that you find on the tool itself, namely information about the tool, the different categorizations, and the mechanism itself. And then you have also options to check the status of the NTBs that have been resolved and the ones that are ongoing. This is all within the context of transparency that is being that is one of the foundations of the AFCFTA agreement. And of course,
Marie, we have more slides, or we can.
Certainly. Okay. So, I will not. I don't have time to actually show you how the mechanism works. But what I would say is that it's important for you, in order for you to be able to report an NTB on the mechanism itself, you have to register on the system. And after that, it's fairly easy for you to report the NTB on the system. So what happens when an NTB is reported on the mechanism? Well, the relevant authorities receive notifications immediately. By relevant authorities, I mean the national focal point of the requesting country and the national focal point of the responding country. So what would happen is that the NTB coordination unit within the AFCFTA secretariat will analyze the plaint to assess whether or not the plaint is actually an NTB. Mm-hmm. And when it is an NTB, then the NTB is, the plaint or the
NTB is allocated. The 12 minutes.
Oh wow, yes. Well, there's a lot to say about the mechanism, but basically there's a process to it that makes the reporting of NTBs online to be in real time, and the resolution also to be a little bit interactive. What I would say is that in terms of timelines, and that's my last intervention, it would depend on the complexity of the problem that is encountered at the borders. So if it's just a problem of misapplication of a regulation at border points, then that's something that can be resolved quite fairly quickly between the different national focal points. But if the matter is so complex as to require, for example, that Parliament enacts a law or amends a law, then of course that would be a little bit more problematic. But that doesn't mean that countries cannot take provisional measures to make sure that the traders do not, the losses to the traders are minimized. So there you go. You have a tool that you can use. And I encourage, of course, the private sector to utilize the tool, because then if it's not utilized, it will not be able to fulfill the purpose for which it was designed. Thank you.
Thank you, Marie. At least we understand that we have a tool, the NTB coordination unit at AFCFTA Secretariat. We have a governance. And if we remove the NTBs, we know that we will gain $20 billion of exchange. That is great.
Well, that's an estimate. Yes.
An estimate, good estimate. So, Ms. Amin, you have something to add? 1 minute, please.
Not really, because I'm not an expert of barriers.
Yeah, just a comment.
But yeah, typically, I think it's important as a comment. I will say I think previously one of the speakers was talking about the lack of good projects. I would say lack of good and sound project preparation. But that's actually for a huge investment, basically. But when it comes, 100 million businesses in Africa are MSMEs, micro, small, and medium enterprises.
Yes.
So here we are talking more about how to improve their governance so that they can access to financing. Now, after accessing to financing, they need to trade. This is where actually access to market is important, and where ACFTA and instruments, tools, processes like non-tariff barriers or customs management, all those tools and instruments come on board. So now that we have the instruments, we have the tools, it's pretty good. We need now to invest, put more energy on upgrading the quality of our businesses.
Thank you. Thank you. With you, Zayan, we will move to the third question. Do you agree with me? So we can say how to better identify the challenges at the free trade agreement and help different parts of the chain to fully benefit from its benefits. So Zayan, the floor is yours.
I believe the fact that we have, something well articulated means that we really understand, what the problem is, and as to say, if you have it articulated, half of the problem is solved. But implementation will be key. When you think about non-tariff barriers, for example, system of enforcement or would be important, because identifying the non-tariff barriers, which are varied and could be as creative as possible, would not be sufficient to ensure that these barriers are removed. I think one thing we have as an advantage at the time the AFCFTA is coming up is technology. So there's an opportunity to eliminate the middleman, an opportunity to have real-time feeding of information, data aggregation, and that helps now for people to onboard what their experiences are. I think systems can be better automated to eliminate the issue of middleman, if I can just use that word again. And with that, we're able to better identify, what the issues are when the AFCFTA fully, comes on stream, and the private sector especially is taking full advantage of it. I think one of the speakers mentioned before that the private sector must really buy in. It must not be left to the intergovernmental stage or international organizations. I think that's where the business, is really done. Money in the hands of the private sector is much more efficient. That means any factor you put in the hands of the private sector by removing barriers and enabling them to prospect properly, and whether SMEs or larger business enterprises, the ability to really play within the space will develop the continent in terms of job creation, in terms of transfer of technology, also reducing the costs of projects, of business generally. And that would also inform improvement of infrastructure, because when there's a market for it, and it's clearly seen that the net back economics is good, people would also invest in infrastructure. Governments would also be able to be part of that. So we have advantages. I think Africa has a young population, average age of 18 or 19 to 20. I think that's significant. That's important, because that's a population that can grapple with technology easily, if I could, say that. And that means that whatever systems are put in place would be properly onboarded, would be properly accessed, and across the continent, there can be that integration. One other thing I'll say is I believe that leadership is very important, more than ever before. In Africa, there are specific organizations that are charged with ensuring that this sees the light of day and things work together. But I think leadership would make the link between the organizations, between the policies around it, between the AU and people on ground, and must buy into that concept of an integrated Africa being an opportunity for prosperity for all Africans. I think it's very important for this to really gain traction.
Really, thanks, Zayan. Yes, you are saying that we have big assets to explore, yes, and to exploit for our free trade agreements. You said technology, information, young population, and leadership. All these are Africans. So why not to explore them, to have to identify, to go further than the challenges that we are facing to integrate Africa. So, Mr. Amin, what do you have as contribution for these subjects?
All my contributions for the last 3 years during the preparation of the AFCFTA. As part of the team, actually, when I was in the African Union Commission and I came to Odanepa to be part of the team actually that prepared and launched the AFCFTA. But all my contribution was focusing on only one area. How do we support and grow our micro, small, and medium enterprises? And let me tell you why, in fact, I do believe that the future of Africa is within MSMEs. We have 100 million MSMEs, I said. Those 100 million MSMEs in 2019, for example, they accounted for 335 million jobs in the continent. When you compare them with large companies in Africa accounted for about 65 million jobs, and all African governments put together accounted for 60 million jobs. That means that, in fact, when we are looking for job, and specifically job creation, it's coming from micro, small, and medium enterprises. That's number one. Number two, and this is as well something very important to note, most of the African MSMEs are actually mostly working in trade, in fact, trade and services. I would say about 70%, 60%, 65% of them precisely are in trade and services. Less than 20%, I think 14% are working in the agriculture business, basically. About 7% in the industry. And the remaining, we will put any other kind of business, including IT and technology. Now, if you look at all the waves going around technology, we have the impression that this represents the biggest opportunity in Africa. Yes, it is an opportunity. But right now, where actually there is a need to strengthen people capacity, business capacity, are mostly in the area of general trade, I would say. And this is extremely important because that tells us as well that there's a future for AFCFTA. What means trade? Trade means mostly import and export and distribution of goods. And this is extremely important. That means that in Africa, we are already going toward this direction. Now, we can improve this, of course, we can sustain this by bringing technology in. Unfortunately, while people really invest into technology, they don't necessarily invest into improving this, even through technology. And this is actually interesting. We prefer, for whatever reasons, actually invest more even in fintech, which is good, but fintech by itself wouldn't necessarily bring value. It will enrich people. It may unlock opportunities, but I'm not sure that it's going to create jobs, for instance. Median age in this continent is 17 to 19 years old. That means that 65% of African population are less than 25 years old. 70% are less than 30 years old, basically. Now, another statistics. If you take some countries in the Sahel region, for instance, take Niger or Chad, every year they are adding up 200,000 youth in the job market, but yet there is no job. So how do we do? I think we believe that, again, supporting MSMEs, specifically in 3 areas, agri-business is important. Not actually send people to do agriculture, no. Because the more people you have in agriculture, the less productive you are. Actually, it's more on the other side. Transforming, utilizing, processing is important. That will, of course, accelerate as well small industrialization. So it's important we invest into agriculture, productivity, link them actually through the value chain, some value chain to industrialization. This is important. Then we would have something to trade, because it doesn't make sense to only talk about AFCFTA. I am part of AFCFTA as an African Union employee. We are promoting this, but at the same time, as a person actually in charge of industrialization, I do believe that we can't just talk about trading when we don't have anything to trade, unless we want to do like, let me say something which is politically incorrect, Nigeria import and re-export, like to Benin, for instance, or to other African, West African countries, they import and they export. Is it what we want for AFCFTA? We want for AFCFTA to trade our own service, our own good. Therefore, and I will conclude here, we need to bring to our micro, small, and medium enterprises a support within 4 areas. Number 1, building their capacity to structure them. I told you at the beginning that only 8% of them are structured, because there are only 92% are unstructured. That means that they appear like very risky investment. You can even bring equity, extremely difficult. I'm not even talking about working capital. Or usually you can access working capital, they can't access equity. Without equity, no growth, number 1. Number 2, and extremely important, provide a very adapted financing model. We should stop thinking that financing development would develop Africa. It is actually financing trade and business that would develop Africa. And to do that, we need an adapted financing model that would take into account, number 1, all the de-risking processes and approach that we are actually pushing forward is very important, because we're working to de-risk MSMEs, bring them at a certain level, so then they could access to financing in terms of equity. And this equity could come from domestic savings, by the way. This is number 2. Number 3, access to market. This is where AFCFTA come on board, basically, with all the mechanism that the AFCFTA as a tool, as an instrument, is providing, and all the work that our colleagues from AFCFTA and other organizations are doing as well, to build capacity of governments to make sure that AFCFTA become a reality. And finally, number 4, and this is extremely important, we need to invest more in social protection. Because of lack of social protection, 80% of African MSMEs die within 3 years, normally. And that means that they keep actually restarting, going back. It's a lot of waste because of lack of social protection. What means social protection? It is healthcare, for instance. It's extremely important. Decent job is extremely important. And finally, protection for investment and for investors as well. An adapted one. So without those 4 elements, we do believe that we would be talking as scholars, researchers, international civil servants, experts of AFCFTA, but it will not translate into something meaningful, impactful, and achievable for business.
Yes, Amin. Yeah. Thank you. I think you already are responding to the 4th questions, and I would like to thank you, because you are highlighting that we have 100 millions of micro and SMEs in Africa. Mostly they are in trade and services, and we need for trade and the subject of this continental free trade area. We need trade of goods and services that they are produced in Africa. So we have to build and reinforce the capacities of the SMEs. We have to give them adapted financing model. We have to offer them access to markets, social protection, and protection of investments. That is what you've said, and it's very highly important. So we can move to, yes, we are moving already to the 4th question, and I give the floor to Marie. If you have your contribution for what are the new stakes of regional integration into the COVID-19 period. Marie is off.
Oh, can you hear me now? Yes, sorry. So I'd say that COVID-19 has had quite an interesting effect, in the sense that, well, of course, it had a negative impact on some businesses, in the sense that the business slowed and some had to close because they had no capacity to comply with the COVID-19 measures and remain in business. But it has also brought to the forefront the importance of e-commerce, in the sense that now you use a different platform or a different tool, to conduct your business. E-commerce actually does have a lot of advantages, in the sense that it allows businesses to scale up, right? It allows them to improve their efficiency, in terms of even the delivery of services that they provide. So it's something that, and I would say it's really relevant also for the youth. It's something that should be leveraged further and should be considered, especially in the context of the AFCFTA. So yeah, I'd say, well, thank you.
Yeah, thank you, Mary. I give the floor to Mr. Zayan because he talked a lot about technology as a really foundation to be developed to consolidate the objective of African continental free trade area. So, Mr. Zayan.
Okay, firstly, I just want to share perhaps an unpopular opinion about the proliferation of SMEs. I think it's a certain state, born of necessity. You don't water sprouts to remain a sprout. The idea is that you want larger organizations that are able to, call on more of the resources to produce more efficiently and have economics of scale. The production problem exists with the proliferation of SME. So, I think we can work from answer to question. Europe, the United States, more developed clients do not have that proliferation of SMEs. The reason being, when these SMEs are fed, properly, then there's growth. The scale of SMEs, we speak of within Africa. What we have termed SMEs, within Africa would perhaps, I know Mr. Amin Ney wants to get in on this, but the fact is,
with your permission.
Yeah. So, the fact
I mean, sorry,
I'm not
Mr.
SMEs.
Continue, and
I must say that there's a role for larger organizations, especially if we're talking about trade across the continent. We have to talk about business enterprises that can actually be involved in the value chain, in several jurisdictions, also pitching in terms of infrastructure and things like that. Of course, we need to provide, opportunities for businesses to thrive, but we must have a project for Africa, because this is having the trade area also informs Africa being able to compete as a bloc with the rest of the world. So we are basically at stage one. There are several other stages to consider. And perhaps if I can say here, I think we have to be more ambitious in terms of setting timelines. And for example, that timelines we've set in 1991 for 2027 would not have taken into account what happened in 2019 and 2020. Now we've set a target for 2063. That's so many years down the line. We need to be bolder in terms of, our ambition and the targets we set for Africa. It has to be a program and a project. I believe it has to be more concerted. I feel the moving parts exist, but this has to be more coordinated, and we have to have an end in sight. As I said before, trade is a means to an end. The end is actually African prosperity, the fact that Africa can compete as a bloc with the rest of the world. We have the resources for future industries. What is our project so that Africa...
Mr. Zayan, we have only 7 minutes left to last our webinar. If you may resume, please.
Sorry, just a few more seconds. For resources for the future, as I said, we will just send raw materials once again, or are we going to be involved in the entire value chain? That's why we need a program, we need a project, and we must not think too small.
Yeah, I agree that we need companies that they can run huge projects for Africa, because we need infrastructure, we need ports, airports, we need roads, and this could be run only by champions. But for it's SMEs, it's job creation for the youth, and we are more than 70% less than. The floor is yours.
Yeah, but it's not just about job creation. It's also about innovation. Take Germany. 60% of jobs in Germany are actually powered by micro, small, and medium enterprises. This is just a fact. right? In
Yeah, but
Africa,
very strong SMEs that don't die within 3 years, as you said.
no, I know, but the thing is that because they have the mechanism that sustain
Yes.
micro, small, and medium enterprises. Like the US, like France, if you look at actually the exports from Europe or from the US or even from China to Africa, it is their SMEs that are exporting in Africa. The share of export from big corporation is quite small. How many cars are we really importing? Or how many phones are we importing? Actually take those phones. Those are the things that we see. But most of the goods and services, and especially services and consultancies, are coming directly and provided directly by micro, small, and medium enterprises from European countries. Now, they have made sure that there is a mechanism, or there are tools that support MSMEs, because MSMEs are the ones that are driving their businesses. It's the case for France, it's the case for Germany, it's the case for Japan. Developed economies are developed because of the strength of their MSMEs. And MSMEs are the ones that drive innovation. And you know well, as I am, Silicon Valley, by the way, is the haven of MSMEs, right? Everything starts there when it comes to technology and innovation, and they are all micro, small, and medium enterprises. And when they reach a certain level, they can actually be absorbed or scaled up because we have.
Yeah.
And it's important not to miss this point. Thanks.
Mrs. Amin, thank you very much. And we can ask now our participants if they have any questions. In French or in English, you are more than welcome. We have several questions, but they're too large. Someone asking for what projects are you suggesting for youth in Africa? So, Amin, are you leaving?
Yeah, sorry.
Amin, yeah, there is a question for you. Someone is asking, one of our dear participants, which kind of projects could you suggest for the youth in Africa?
Sorry a second.
Yeah, which kind of project you can suggest to the youth in Africa, to job creation? Yes.
You know, in this continent, everything have to be done, right? So usually, unfortunately, I would say, the last 2 3 years, there is a tendency of everyone going only into technology, especially those who've been to school education, because it's quite light in terms of initial investment, which is okay. Or some people are going into agribusiness, but mostly, again, as I would say, connected to technology. And unfortunately, again, many people are going into business because it's done by default. They don't have something else to do, they believe. And once they have a job, they just go back. Now, where to invest, basically? Tech, pharma, actually, especially for youth as well. Tech pharma. In most of our countries, we don't even have a small factory to produce serum. You know, this serum that we utilize for the perfusion. We don't have it. Most of the Central African region countries, or even in West Africa, they do import that. But do you know that for $100,000 normally you could actually start this kind of investment? And fundings exist for this kind of actually initiative. It's a micro manufacturing, and it's very possible to do it. You know, food processing is another one as well. And of course, transport is another one. So food processing, transport is key right now, again. And then you have the pharma, especially for some basic products, goods, and services. So there is a lot of areas, I would say. It's up to the youth to be imaginative, to be creative and innovative. But more important, again, before we start a project, I keep telling people, make sure that you structure your business very well. That's number one. Make sure that you are not alone. That's number two. And that's extremely important, because if you want to be the unique, the only one investing in your business, it's a recipe somehow to go and so
thank you. Thank you, Amin. We have 1 minute left. So 1 minute, 30 seconds to Marie and 30 seconds to Zayan. Marie?
Thank you. I'd say if it's about the last messages, I would encourage the participants to utilize the AFCFTA NTB tool as much as possible and actually give it a chance, right? The idea is really to provide the private sector with a platform where they can have their voices heard or the issues that they encounter at border resolved. So the institutional framework is there, the processes have been put in place, the tool has been developed. Please use it. It's operational. Thanks.
Thank you, Marie. And Mr. Zayan?
Yeah, just to say as well that within the context of what we're discussing, which is trade, to be able to trade internationally means there's some level of production, and then seeking markets, within a larger framework and that opportunity. And that's why assessment of SME comes in. That when we're talking about intra-African trade, you need bigger clusters to be able to, go outward rather than stick with the system. We have to be careful with comparisons with the US, for example. The US is the largest economy, and within that economy, there are no barriers, no matter, how many of them you have. So we have to understand the concept of trade, that opportunity, engender opportunities for trade, and looking at the net economics. I feel the small enterprises will go bigger and be able to trade across the continent, be able to have technology development and bigger opportunities for the continent at large.
Thank you, Mr. Zayan. And Amin, your word, your message?
Again, for me, my message to everyone, yes, ACFTA is a huge opportunity and we should actually really take it. But we would be able to take full advantage and profit of ACFTA only if we improve the quality of governance in our countries, that will support actually the construction of positive and sound business environment. And that's extremely important. Yes. Without governance, there is no really ACFTA at the end of the day.
Yes. Great thanks, dear distinguished speakers, dear participants. I think we had a very fruitful exchange, debate about this changing the paradigms for successful integration. We heard all our speakers talking about the big assets that Africa is enjoying, youth, technology, all resources that we have, natural resources and everything that we have, all chances to go ahead for a free trade and full integration of so many sectors. So I think we have a great message for this great opportunity for our continent. So I reiterate my thanks to the Ifrane Forum for this initiative, and we hope seeing you soon for another webinar about this challenging subject. Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Marie. Thank you, Zayan.
Yeah, thank you. Bye-bye.
Bye.